Welcome, everyone. Oh, now it's recording. Confirm. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to see so many faces. Of course, my students, extra welcome, but all of the colleagues and everyone. I don't know, maybe I'll get to know you, but it's really nice to have that many people. Also, people from the States and from Canada, I think, who are now seeing the stream. So very welcome. This is the annual Kress Talks, and the Kress Talks are by the PhD candidates from the States or from Canada who have something with the Netherlands. Their topic deals with, most of the time, the 17th century Dutch Republic, and they have 2 years here to do archives, to do museums, to visit museums, to make networks, etc. And every year we ask them to present what their topic is, what they're dealing with. And our first talk will be by Juliet Huang from the University of Maryland. And she's a PhD candidate of Elizabeth Honig, sorry. And her PhD title is Dressing the Speaking Hand, fashion accessoires around the hand in the 17th century Netherlands. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Stein. And good afternoon, or goedemiddag, everyone. And thank you for coming to my talk today about 17th century Dutch gloves. Among the most welcoming couples in the recent Frans House exhibition in Berlin and Amsterdam were Tiedemann Roosterman and Catharina Brugman. Although Tiedemann and Catharina are physically separated and confined in 2 panels, they are nonetheless connected to each other and to the beholder. Tiedemann's shadow continues into the painting of Catharina and falls by her right hand. The gloves in her left hand, which cut the edge of the canvas, are precisely aligned with and extend her left arm into the viewer space. With the fingers of the gloves hooked with Catharina, with her fingers and the thumb turned aside like hers, the gloves mirror her hand. This pair of portraits speaks of gloves' interactive and connective nature and their intimate relation to the body, which is what I would like to discuss in my talk today. In his book, Sensuous Surfaces, The Decorative Object in Early Modern China, Jonathan Hague advocates for a shift of focus from an object status as luxury to the pleasurable experience of the object. Treating objects as symbols of wealth and social status moves us away from our engagement with the thought process of the artisans and the material thinking embedded in the object. Following Hague's conceptual framework, I will focus on the beholder's / wearer's empathetic engagement with gloves' sensuous surfaces, or the surfacescape in Hague's word. I will explain how the senses and affection co-create emotional and social connections and how portraits capture the experience of gloves as affective objects. Let me begin by taking you to experience a pair of gloves that I have examined in person at the Goens Museum Den Haag. The gloves are made of leather. It is white, soft, and very smooth to the touch, just like human skin. The cuffs are deeply cut into lobes, which can be widely opened to accommodate the movement of the wrists. The palms of the gloves, which are hardly seen in portraits, are slashed throughout. These slashes roughly correspond to the joints, easing the movement of the fingers. And gloves like these were probably used for weddings. In that case, these slashes would have served as air vents for the bride's sweaty palms as she got nervous on her wedding day. So the gloves thus think with the body during interaction. Compared to the moderate glove body, the cuffs are splendidly decorated with golden arabesque of scrolls intertwined with pearls, sequins, and silver bullion knots that project from the silken background like relief. So just imagine how the cuffs would have caught the flickering candlelight in the 17th century. The subtle gradation in the embroidered flower petals and leaves create a shimmering effect in an echo of the bejeweled surface. From close up, my eyes are lost in the shimmering patterns that seem to change or dissolve at any point. And it is only from a distance that the motifs appear stabilized and lucid. In the middle of the cuffs rises a flaming heart, flanked by a flower on each side. The upward movement of the flaming heart is counterbalanced by the downward movement of the golden lilies on the sides. The stem of the lily curves up in a serpentine manner before it bends down, as if it wants to come out of the pearl frame. The frame of each lobe is shaped like a pointed arch of Islamic architecture. The juxtaposition of the purplish-blue silken background, which recalls lapis lazuli, and the common Netherlandish floral motifs conflates the experiences of familiarity and strangeness. And to add to the effect of supernatural marvel and aesthetic pleasure, gloves like these would have also exuded olfactory enchantment. Many recipes for perfuming gloves from the 16th and 17th centuries were published in books of secrets, such as Giambattista della Porta's Natural Magic. As the title of Della Porta's book suggests, perfume gloves were perceived as magical things. According to Della Porta, gloves will become very sweet in a year's space. For perfuming gloves will require flowers from different seasons, such as violets and gilliflowers in the spring and jasmines in the winter. So when a person smells a pair of perfume gloves, they smell, at least in theory, flowers from various seasons at the same time. Therefore, perfume gloves could be perceived as an olfactory equivalent to floral still lifes, where flowers from different seasons miraculously bloom together. The flowers often embroidered on surviving Dutch gloves, carnations, violets, roses, lilies, etc., also happen to be the ingredients for making perfume gloves in 16th and 17th century recipes. Therefore, they visually embody the wonderful smell of the gloves. Previous scholarship on 17th century Dutch gloves tended to focus on the symbolic meaning of each embroidered motif and turned to emblem books for interpretation. The surfacescape of gloves, however, is far from being a mere array of individual motifs. Instead, it is dynamic and elicits the viewer's emotional and bodily participation. René Descartes' theory on machine is instrumental to our understanding of the affective material experiences. According to Descartes, machines' multisensory engagement is crucial to evoking a sense of wonder and pleasure in the beholder, which then prompts inquiry about the science of machinery. Therefore, an ideal 17th century Dutch beholder should be able to move beyond amazement to figure out how the wonder happened. Much to our disappointment, the wonder of perfume gloves can hardly be deciphered through Renaissance recipes. Della Porta's recipes for perfume gloves, for example, list ingredients and a succinct method. However, one may ask, how many ounces of each ingredient are needed? And how fine should the ingredients be ground, right? Lacking in specificity, Della Porta's recipes are not operational. The call for experience and experimentation to make a recipe operational is explicit in a letter that Andreas Covius wrote to Constantijn Huygens. I find the description of its oily extraction in The Natural Magic of J.B. Porter, but the whole consists in the practice, which you have. But as the scent of perfume is communicated, the sciences must also be made communicable. Constantijn Huygens, diplomat and secretary to the stadtholder in the first half of the 17th century, was indeed an amateur perfumer. His effort in revealing the tacit knowledge of perfume making is evidenced in his collection of about 150 perfume recipes, mostly from the 1630s to the 1660s, in a manuscript now preserved at the Royal Library in The Hague. Over a third of them are for perfuming gloves. And I would like to thank Dr. Ineke Hausman from the Huygens Institute for generously sharing these recipes with me. Huygens' collection of perfume recipes is invaluable to my research because it reveals not only a variety of sensations that perfume gloves could have achieved, but also the possibilities of connection that smells open up. And just like those Renaissance recipes, each individual recipe in Huygens' collection barely suffices to instruct on perfuming gloves. However, the recipes supplement one another and have allowed me to piece together a quasi-database about the perfuming processes. Some recipes are written for working with different materials, such as horse leather, thick goat leather, and kid leather, which is a thin skin from young goats. And some recipes offer solutions for achieving certain colors, including brown, brown ash, blackish brown, cordovan red, white, and yellow. They offer different methods for perfuming as well. Fragrance could be absorbed through fuming, steeping, or rubbing. The recipes also show regional differences. While some recipes showcase how to perfume gloves in a Spanish fashion, others are intended for Roman, Venetian, French, or English manners. Perhaps only a sharp and knowledgeable nose like Huygens' could tell. This vast knowledge is partly derived from Huygens' own experiment. On the left, we see a sketch of a reservoir he made for catching rose essence, and on the right is an entry from 1647. Here, he was trying to perfume at least 2 gloves, but he didn't do well in the second one. So I hurried too much with the second glove, Huygens wrote, which was spotted and uneven, and I had a lot of trouble fixing it by adding a little more 1, 2, 4, and here I'm not sure what it refers to exactly. I think that it needed a little more gum, as I did at the end. I worked them on the chafing dish, where it seems to me the ambergris gets old. So as the entry shows, he did not manage the portion, tempo, and temperature well during this experiment, but he learned the lesson. The details of the date and the trying, failing, and reflecting process allow the reader to experience the experiment through Huygens' eyes. The experience of perfuming gloves is also contributed by other people. The recipes in Huygens' collection are written in multiple languages, including Dutch, French, English, and Italian. Many of them are not in Huygens' handwriting, which further speaks of the diverse sources of his collection. Some recipes were exchanged for knowledge. For example, the recipe that Huygens received from Van Dongen, a perfumer from The Hague, records Van Dongen's tips about dealing with the gum tragacanth during perfuming gloves. And some recipes were exchanged as a return of favor. Having received a recipe from Eleanor de Vauville to make amber water, Huygens sent her a perfume recipe in return. Therefore, the recipes functioned as social connectors within Huygens' circle. Unlike Renaissance books of secrets penned by a single author, Huygens' recipe book functioned more like an olfactory album amicorum. And after the perfume was distilled, the residue ingredients could be put in sachet and sent as gifts. The aromatic sachet that Huygens sent to Anglo-Dutch singer Utrecht Argo was accompanied by a letter. He expresses in the letter his wish that the sachet will transport me from time to time into a beautiful musical dream of Argo's bath and under her sheet. So the immaterial smell stands in for Huygens and carries memories of him even when he is absent. In Rembrandt's portraits of Martin Solmans and Opium Copit, Martin is about to extend his glove toward his wife. What is about to be shared is not only the physical body of the glove, but also its smell. The glove materially and immaterially extends Martin's body into Opium's, as well as the beholder space. In Frans Hauss's portraits of Stephanus Helaars and Isabella Kooijmans, they each take their right glove off. The flower, a traditional symbol of smell that is about to be passed from Isabella to Stephanus, takes the place of their right gloves. Here, the immaterial smell alone substitutes the affective gloves to link their hands. Gloves in the 17th century Netherlands multisensorially represent and carry the agency of the hand. As Peter Stalybreast and Anne Jones have shown in their article, Fetishizing the Glove in Renaissance Europe, the agency of gloves already plays an important role in the Renaissance imagination. Unlike the localized agency in English or Italian Renaissance gloves, what is unique about 17th century Dutch gloves is that their agency lies in interaction. They move between individuals and stage social exchanges that are enmeshed in both production and reception of gloves. 17th century Dutch portraits should be understood as more than just visual records of fashionable gloves. Instead, they loop the beholder in a sensory affective community. The multisensory experiences of gloves create meaningful connections between lovers and friends, between now and then, and between ideal and real. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet, for this really nice talk about not only material culture, but also the experience of material culture, certainly clothes. So in that way, it's very nice to see how there are methodologies, how you can really try to recreate that experience of clothes. So that was really nice to hear. Yes. So if you come and sit, then I can see. I think we'll do something like this.
Sorry, I'm just a little taller, so you know.
Good like that?
Oh yeah.
Yes, I think you're
That's
right
good.
in the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. So we proceed to the
Okay.
Oh, but then
Then you have to.
I need to be in the picture. Yeah, more or less, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
So, Alex, it's nice to have you again. Because it's his second year, so it's already his second talk at the Crestals. Alex is from UC Santa Barbara. He's a PhD candidate with Anne Jensen Adams. And the title of his PhD project is Common Ground, Landscape and the Mediation of Technology in the Dutch Republic. Alec, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Stein. And thanks, Juliet, for already a fantastic talk. I thought our talks would have nothing in common, but in fact, I think there is some unexpected overlap. So,
yeah, the Q&A will be
yes, it's going to be a memorable time, I'm sure. I'll just preface really quickly. This is an excerpt from the second chapter of my dissertation, and I'm hoping to prepare it for publication. So I've actually put my email there if anyone wants to get in touch with feedback, because it would be actually super helpful. So with that said, I'll just get started here. Oh, right. Yes, okay.
It's actually a fact.
Okay, did I do something?
Yeah. No.
Proceed? Oh,
That's fine.
okay. All right. So in 1632, the mill maker and engineer Jan Adriaansen Levater executed a pen and ink drawing on parchment, celebrating his contribution to the reclamation of the Beemster Lake in North Holland. The feat was accomplished with the aid of drainage mills, an example of which Levater has positioned in the center of the sheet absent its facade. Within the mill's frame, one can likewise see a paddle wheel, which would push water out of the polderland. But this is not all that Levater endeavors to show the viewer. At left, he depicts a house with complicated brickwork, flanked by two willowy trees and enclosed in a sturdy fence. A woman points to the house while a rabbit races ahead, and a small dog trots towards its human behind her. Between the mill and a secondary schematic of the gear shaft that turns the paddle wheel, a man struts with his own dog following closely behind. And in the right margin, Levater pictures a circular tower with a large wooden door and a peaked roof with little flags. It is not a drawing by an artist, and above all, it demonstrates a lack of conventional artistic training. The motivating question of this talk is why Levater would make this elaborate drawing and what claims it makes for his work as a mill maker and engineer. I argue here that Levater consciously adopted tropes of landscape draftsmanship to develop a view of his engineering and building work as a singular expression of his creative personality. Oh, and there's a little map there so you can see Amsterdam with the star and the Beemster in the north. Okay, but first, there are numerous very helpful inscriptions in the lower margin that provide some preliminary answers as to why Levater made the drawing. The last inscription in the lower left corner indicates the drawing was, quote, for the Dijkreef Dirk van Os, the son of a major investor in the Beemster project who ended up taking the reins from his father, so to speak, in managing the reclaimed land. This explains the unique relevance of the other inscriptions on this side of the sheet, which provide Dutch and Latin translations of Psalm 127, quote, unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain, end quote. This might seem an odd sentiment to share with the inheritor of a major financial stake in a major land reclamation project, but Dutch Protestant translations of the psalm attributed the verse to wise King Solomon. Levater thus construes Dirk van Os as a similarly shrewd leader of the Beemster. While not directly related to the circumstances around Levater's drawing, Rembrandt would later paint a portrait of Dirk van Os Jr. over 20 years later, wherein the artist captured something of his sitter's dignity and authority that had surely intensified in his later years. But back to the drawing, there's a second set of inscriptions at right that complete our foundation for the present talk. The first one, quote, to God alone honor and glory, is Levater's personal motto and appears throughout his work. The following, give eternal praise, honor, and gratitude to God the Father, I take to be a more generic statement of faith. The final inscription in Latin, nihil ab omne parte beatum, or nothing happy in every respect, seems at first glance an unusual sentiment to share in the context of a gift. But it appears to be a quote from one of Horace's odes about odium, or the quiet life away from the pursuit of glory, which, in the case of the excerpt on the screen, would include foolhardy adventures at sea. Now that we have looked at most aspects of the drawing, I want to highlight two features. First, the drawing was a gift. Second, Levater appears to invoke otium. These two elements together were, it turns out, important features of 17th century Dutch landscape draftsmanship. It is from this basis that I argue here that Levater manipulates the practice and decorum of landscape drawing to position his representation of a technological invention, the mill, as a kind of artistic invention. Thus, he imaginatively asserts himself not merely as a mill maker and engineer, but an elite amateur artist. Correspondingly, many features of the drawing attempt to support this claim to creative agency, which builds not only on art theoretical frameworks, but also earlier developments in the history of technical drawing. And again, Constantijn Huygens appears. And so we need to define otium and its relationship to drawing first. And here I build on well-established scholarship in the field. But Constantijn Huygens, secretary to the Stadhouder of the Dutch Republic, as we heard in the previous talk, was just one key proponent of this concept as it constructed an elite social identity. His country house poem titled Hofwijk, or literally Escape from Court, captured the carefree attitude of rural leisure promised by odium away from urban concerns. His poetry also enacted the very activities that one might pursue away from professional obligations, namely creative intellectual pursuits. Amateur landscape draftsmanship was also well suited to such periods of personal retreat, as landscape subjects registered the artist's remove from other pressing concerns. Drawing, as we know, had already been established a refined ability in courtly contexts, most famously through Castiglione's The Courtier. Thus, it was entirely natural for Huygens' son to take up sketching during brief moments of respite on his diplomatic journeys later in the century, as in the Getty sheet at right, which I show here merely to be sort of representative. But more to the point, these amateur artists and their audience were also characterized as leafhebbers, who possessed a unique appreciation of landscape drawings within the context of amicable social exchange. And this was this is a broadly international phenomenon. As Henry Peacham noted in his Complete Gentleman, and that's the screen grab in the lower left, of 1634, drawing fanatics who went by the term leafhebbers in Dutch or virtuosi in Italian ravenously purchased drawings after significant antiquities. Peacham's contemporary and fellow countryman, Edward Norgate, is particularly vocal about the social implications of landscape. In the quote from the top left, he sheepishly requests drawings free of charge in a letter to yet another Englishman, William Trumbull, in 1619. Quote, how very welcome a few designs or drawings of Rubens or Willem van Nuland would have been or would be yet, not that I would impose a matter of charge upon you for my pleasure, but if some of their first and slight drawings, either of landscapes or any other such thing as might happily be procured for a word, they being things never sold, but given to friends that are leafhebbers. And I think you can read here, he's trying to get out of paying, basically, but it's friends, so we're good. But he would basically kind of continue this thought just under 10 years later in The Art of Limning, Norgate further, in which he further elucidates the relationship of leafhebbers and artists. He writes of the origins of landscape that, quote, a gentleman of Antwerp being a great leafhebber returning from a long journey to visit his old friend, an ingenious painter of that city, whose house and company he usually frequented. It continues that the social interaction resulted in the production of a landscape image. And so it continues, quote, this first essay at landscape, it seems, got the painter crowns and credit. This begins others to imitate, and now the art has grown to that perfection, wherewithal Sir Peter Rubens of Antwerp was so delighted in his later time, as he quitted all his other practice in picture and story. With respect to Rubens, we can say his landscapes were produced in the context of odium, and which would have been seen by only the most select leafhebbers as a private expression of Rubens's most sort of creative authenticity, basically. In this light, Levater's Beemster drawing constructs a social relationship in which the sheet is a coveted gift among dear friends and a privileged view of a singular creativity. If this corresponds to the reality of Van Os's relationship to Levater, I have no clue. But I think the sheet is certainly indicative of Levater's ambition in this regard. We do know that Levater positioned himself as a leafhebber in his famous Haarlemmermeer book of 1641, which proposed reclaiming the large inland lake roughly between Amsterdam and Leiden, where Schiphol Airport is today. And the quote here just says, I, Jan Adriaansen, am a lover and amateur of diking and draining of lakes. So that's very nice. In his manuscript maps related to that project, which are well beyond the parameters of the present talk, Levater would likewise address his audience as leafhebbers. In that context, too, Levater constructed a community of amateurs to which he likewise belonged, and who were linked as fellow leafhebbers of land reclamation. With respect to the Beemster drawing, which is demonstrably linked to these later projects, but again, kind of outside of this talk, he effectively fuses the amateur topics of drainage and drawing. We have now talked a fair amount about drawing from the artistic standpoint, but it is also necessary to identify as well the ways in which he engages the visual culture of engineering. His mill schematic standing within a suggested environment recalls earlier theaters of machines or printed collections of engineering solutions of the 16th and early 17th centuries. With respect to the engraving from the French engineer Jean Erard's Book of Mathematical Instruments of 1584, one finds a similar contextualization of a windmill flanked by two smaller buildings in a landscape environment. The inscription notes how the angle of the sails makes it easier to catch the wind. The image also includes a breakaway detail in the left margin, similar to what we have already noted in the Beemster image. One finds numerous copies of theaters of machines in 17th century Dutch library auction catalogs, so it would not be altogether surprising if Levater saw himself in a lineage of such illustrious engineers. However, the landscape details, architectural staffage, and paratextual elements are incidental to the mill in the print, whereas for Levater, these same compositional elements cumulatively made a broad claim for his creative persona. To this point, we must discuss the final poem immediately beneath Levater's Beemster Mill, as the verses do not merely highlight its efficacy, but the mill's godlike power. He writes, quote, "The mill stands still as long as it doesn't blow, but as the wind rises, the wheel turns around it. Just as it is between God and the person who doesn't know him. God's fury slumbers for a while as if God forgets, then he punishes and grinds all evil, as every sinner knows, so beware." One cannot help but feel, though, that Levater was tacitly making a case for his own perhaps under-acknowledged abilities as a mill maker by association. Relating drainage mills to human qualities was actually not far-fetched. A subsequent portrait print after a design by Thomas de Keyser highlighted Levater's, quote, "spirit, which works all the time and never becomes tired." Such a characterization suggests a work ethic verging on the mechanical, or perhaps even comparable to a drainage mill. Rumer Fischer's earlier emblem compared the workings of a drainage mill to the diligent prince who works, quote, "in his heart to cast out difficulty and misfortune with the most benefit and least harm, day and night for his people." Levater's poem extolling the power of the mill could thus easily draw attention to the person who made it possible. I do not want, however, to suggest an emblematic reading of the Beemster drawing to the exclusion of all the other ways by which Levater articulated his creative persona. Drawing for Levater was not merely a practical tool, but a form of play that was inextricable from his building practice. If we take a second look at the main features of the drawing again, the house, the tower, and the drainage mill, the three structures taken together, in fact, represent Levater's practical range as a builder. In his posthumously published autobiography, In Kleine Chronica of 1654, Levater describes the full extent of his built oeuvre, which includes the categories of structures implied by the drawing itself. He writes, quote, "I have in my time made various sorts of mills, also houses and sluices." And he continues further down, "I also laid bricks at the New Amsterdam Town Hall and at the Tower of the Nieuwe Kerk." And that's among many other things that he mentions. But this curriculum vitae is followed by a poem that really links the act of building to the act of drawing. Sometimes also playing with the pen to draw churches and castles, thereby drawing rough and fine. It can, praise God, still be so nice. Drawing is not merely practical, but a source of delight for a creative personality. This should recall otium. And Levater's linking of drawing and building as components of his singular authority diverge from conventional accounts of architectural and building practice. Salomon de Bruy's Architectura Moderna of 1631, a paean to the sculptor and Amsterdam city mason Hendrik de Keyser and the builder Cornelis Donkerts, differentiates their roles. One poem states, quote, "Men will boast of Keyser and the name of Donkerts praise, who with what Hendrik sketched by his skillful hand did make." In contrast, Levater assumes responsibility for both drawing and building. And so now I want to defamiliarize Levater's linking of drawing and building through reconsideration of two strains of drawing practice with which he consciously engaged. The first tradition is the practice of landscape draftsmanship, which we have discussed. And the second one is the tradition of patent drawings. And this latter inheritance is implied, I think, by his chosen vocabulary for describing his Beemster Mill, Conterfeitinge van Beemster Molle, or Contrafactum of Beemster Mills. Lavater used the term Konterfeitinge in most of his surviving drawings, but this word choice is, to the best of my understanding, more common in the 16th century. And I only know of the leftmost example on the screen that uses the term to describe a map of Haarlem from 1590. Elsewhere, Peter Partial observed that words related to the Latin contrafactum were used to bolster an artist's claim to direct witness in the context of natural history and other factual printed images. He argued that eventually the claim to objectivity led to the authorial erasure of the artist, particularly in the context of landscape images, as in the title page to the small landscapes of 1559. Oh, and I forgot to switch the slide. Sorry. There's on the left the detail with the map of 1590. Now I'm talking about the middle image, the small landscapes. But I have found that the story is more complex in that in the late 16th century, in patent decrees, the term Konterfeit routinely appears in that context, not exactly in the modern negative usage of counterfeit, but to connect the idea of copying to the requirement of express consent from the patent holder. To put it differently, the contrafactum in this context directly implicated its maker, making a case for drawings as a public expression of authorship outside the context of artistic production. Oh yeah, so that's sort of something I've looked at in the archive, and I've pulled out the relevant quote there. This has implications for another archive I have worked with as the Kress Fellow, and I want to use that to explore the ancestry of Lavater's Beemster drawing. Patent drawings survive in the manuscript patent decrees of the states of Holland between 1589 to 1601. In the first year, the original manuscript decrees and their drawings were copied in their entirety. This was never repeated. In other words, changing administrative procedures and the survival of the drawings themselves imply a developing understanding of them as objects in relation to the invention that they describe. And so the Delft municipal carpenter Cornelis Maus's vibrant watercolor drawing of a highly unconventional drainage mill was copied in the rightmost image on the screen. Not by him, I should say. And the dark patches of grass from the original are replicated with squiggles of pen and brown ink, suggesting that the total affect of the drawing was important to replicating the original idea described in the accompanying text. Okay, so subsequent patent drawings appear alongside more robust textual statements of creative status. The Dordrecht merchant Frans van Bakkelvaart was granted freedom from the Sawyers Guild for his horse-powered mill, and that's at left. Recalling, for me at least, a famous episode in architectural history in which the Utrecht stonemason Willem van Noort argued for his own creative freedom from the stonemasons guild in that city. The middle image by Willem Nys, another a tradesperson basically, wrote of his horse-powered drainage mill that it was, quote, an honorable and useful art, elevating his building craft. And the Haarlemmer at left, the Haarlemmer Adrien Terrier at left noted of his drawing of an ice ship that it represented, quote, without, though, picturing therein the skates and rudder, wherein rests the great art and the secret of the thing, end quote. This last statement, of course, recalls Pamela Long's work on the relative values of openness and secrecy in the development of technical authorship in the early modern period. For us, we are concerned with the related question of how drawing was enlisted in establishing this public identity in visual terms. And I should say Lavater also participated in the patent system as early as 1605, though I have not recovered drawings in this context. Understood in relation to their textual components, these surviving patent drawings, and ultimately Lavater's Beemster Mill drawing, articulate not merely an invention, but aspects of their maker's inventiveness as part of their public persona. Builders and tradespeople achieved an understanding of drawing that was very nearly artistic, but not quite. Correspondingly, 17th century art theory created a space for drawing as a widely useful tool, not limited to artistic production. This practical side of drawing is an Aristotelian convention, but it is notable that Dutch art theory becomes increasingly engaged with the wide possibilities of drawing. In his Silderboek, Karl van Mander noted that drawing was useful to, quote, many arts, goldsmithing, building, and more. By 1670, Willem Houry would become even more granular in his description of its utility, noting that drawing was necessary for painters, sculptors, glass engravers, gold and silversmiths, even carpenters, bricklayers, or master masons, and military engineers. Nonetheless, these texts are still fundamentally about drawings for artistic ends, which highlights how the patent drawings I showed a moment ago were not aesthetic objects, despite their claim to inventiveness on the part of their makers. And so, yes, I have a diagram. This distinction between artistic and practical forms of drawing and of invention gets to the root of Lavater's Beemster sheet as an expression of his creativity. The left-hand column featured the various terms I have found in the patent archive for drawings by builders and tradespeople, and I've placed Lavater's Counterfeiting at the top. The vocabulary is extremely unstandardized, but they share a standard claim to represent an invention and articulate inventiveness of the maker by association. But what I want to underline here is that practical drawings, whatever name they go by in the patent archive, are never referred to as takening in the art critical sense. I think the main difference is that while artistic drawings demonstrate invention and inventiveness in rhetorical terms, they likewise demonstrate invention as a site of personal style or handling, as described by Van Mander. And so, in conclusion, it is with this fuller understanding of invention that I think we can fully appreciate Lavater's adoption of landscape tropes in his Beemster drawing. I have placed it alongside a compositionally similar sheet by amateur landscape draftsman and liefhebber Jan de Bisschop. And in the case of Bisschop, one sees evidence of artistic training, for instance, in his ability to model the mill and space with light and shade. Lavater, by contrast, struggles with these artistic conventions, particularly with respect to the spatial organization of the house in the left margin of the Beemster sheet. Lavater draws from the standpoint of a builder, rather than an artist or a painter-architect. Nonetheless, Lavater not only insists that his contrafactum be considered a personal expression of his invention and his inventiveness. Additionally, I think Lavater uses the tropes of landscape draftsmanship, that is, the intimate creative expression afforded by liefhebberij and otium, to make the additional claim that he, as a mill maker and engineer, has style. Simply put, he unites drawing discourses from different fields in the space of his Beemster drawing. And it is from this basis and style that one can speak of a creative personality in visual terms in the first place. From this elevated register, building and drawing, reclaiming land and representing landscape become a united creative statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alec. It's so nice to see how rich concepts like invention, creativity can be, and certainly with this kind of case study, was so much telling. So please take a seat.
Oh, we're sitting. Okay.
Yeah, keep sitting. Why should you stand?
I know. Yeah.
Take a seat and adjust the camera so they both can see you. I hope that works out well. Yeah, that works out well with this, right? All right, and then I'm gonna sit maybe too. No, I'm gonna stand. Okay, so of course yours. So are there questions? And also the people from the chat, please put your questions in the chat. But are there questions in the room? And then we go to the questions in the chat. Marika.
So thank you both for the talks. I'm still thinking about the gloves, but I have a question or maybe a suggestion to you about the Lavater inventie. So if I understand your premise correctly, you claim this is a drawing in the artistic sense, right? A takening, because we see elements, and you talk about the people, the animals, and the two buildings either side of the window that make it a landscape.
Yeah.
Right? But it seems to me, but who am I, right? That if you look at that drawing, you see the mill and the construction, like you, as is the case, and you've shown other examples, where you see the inner secret, how the thing works. And it seems to me also, because there is this very straight line upon sort of elevated, upon which the house on the one side, the domestic space on the one side, the tower, which is the defense, or maybe it's where things are kept, or has a political meaning, sort of symbolize what you can make once the land is drained. So they are the effect in terms of benefit for people living that is the inhabitants of the
Yeah.
land, and the political powers as symbolized in the tower that result from the mill. So I don't see this as a landscape painting in that way.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and I mean, I think there is kind of that. When you were saying that, I was thinking of this political register of the Garden of Holland in a way. You know, kind of showing like what's possible here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like an enclosed garden in a sense.
No, I know, I'm familiar with that.
Oh,
But
oh,
I think this is really about showing what the mill, in economic, practical, technological invention that it is, can do and has done already for this country.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
and-
Yeah, and I mean, I think one constant refrain in the Haarlemmermeer book and in the manuscript maps sort of related to that project is Levater constantly mentions the common good. And so I think you're absolutely spot on, in fact, that there is this kind of other motivating factor. But I think Levater also was very full of himself as an individual. And so I think he was trying to kind of manipulate various visual conventions, sort of what he had at his disposal, to kind of, I think probably to kind of drum up some business, basically, with Dirk van Os potentially. And so I think for him, he wanted to really elevate himself in a sense. And for that, I think he also needed to kind of borrow from these sort of landscape conventions as they were. So I mean, I think it's a really valuable point, and it's one I want to include absolutely.
Other questions? Yes, Hanneke.
Yeah, thank you both very much for these two very inspiring talks. I have a question for Juliet. I was very intrigued, obviously, by your gloves, and also by the embroidery on the
Cups.
on the cuffs, and whether that was done, whether you were going to do anything more on that in terms of experience and experiencing the material while you embroider. I mean, you spend a lot of time with the material when you embroider something. So perhaps, but that's actually something that I hope you will say a little bit more about eventually. My question was actually about what you said at first, that you were interested not in the object of luxury and how it was made, but how it is experienced by the sitters that you showed us. To what extent are you interested in their discomfort? Because you actually stressed the comfort, like this kind of just the fragrance of the gloves. But sometimes, I mean, if you look at those clothes that some of the women are primarily wearing, and then those gloves too, they don't really look very comfortable, right? And how are you going to deal with the other side of experience as well?
And that is a very good point. You know, like it comes, like beauty comes with a cost, and that's very true. Because you know, like with those bejeweled gloves, you simply cannot really do anything. You know, like you have to be really careful. So I remember on one pair of gloves I have examined at Amsterdam Museum, like the thumb on the thumb side, you know, there is a little bit like blue. So because you know, like the gloves are like very wide, and you know, like so it's very easy to just like catch color and be stained, and you cannot really wash it. It's leather, so it's not very like practical, you know. And also on the other side, you know, like with all of the bejeweled things, and then think about the entire ensemble. It's in silk, so you'll be really careful. Otherwise, those jewels might easily scratch your dresses. And you're absolutely right. You know, like it does comes with some like discomfort wearing those gloves.
There's a question by Jasper Martens. Thank you for your great talks. I have a question about the origins of scents used for perfume gloves. The origins of ambergris, which comes from the sperm whale, were still largely unknown in the 17th century. I assume that the musk used in the gloves originated from musk deer in India. Do you think the non-local and unfamiliar origins, whether known or not, of these scents influenced their appreciation?
And if so, did people perceive them differently compared to more locally sourced scents?
That is a wonderful question, and I would say I agree with them. So it's true, you know, like so actually the source of like nowadays we know ambergris comes from the very smelly gut of the whale, but back in the 17th century it was not known until if I recall correctly, it was not known until the end of the 18th century. So it was still like a miracle back then. So yeah, so I would say, you know, since the experience of scent has a lot to do with this imagination, and you know it also has a lot to do with, you know, like this imagination of wonder and also kind of like strangeness. So I absolutely agree with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes. Nadine.
Thank you both for lovely papers. I also had a question about gloves. You talk about the Dutch glove. When I think about Huygens' perfume recipes, they came from all over the place.
Yeah.
And at least 25% or perhaps 50% from the recipes come from England. Mm-hmm. So to what extent is the glove then still Dutch?
Give me a second to think about that. And I love that question. And it's true, you know, like I don't think we should put a national label on gloves, and it's really hard to trace to really say this is absolutely like Dutch, because if we think about the production of gloves itself, so for instance, the leather, it may have come from Spain, but the cutting could have been done in England or somewhere, but the embroidery could have been done here in Holland. Like, you know, like there's no way to say this is like 100% like made in Holland. Yeah, but here what I am talking about, like Dutch gloves, is how gloves would have been perceived and plays an important role in the Dutch visual culture. So as I said, you know, like it. So for example, in those like the passing of them. Yeah.
There's another question on the gloves. How might you tease out relationship between impermanence of perfume and permanence of gloves? That's a question by Jessie Parker. Shall I repeat?
Yes.
Of course. How might you tease out a relationship between the impermanence of the perfume, so the temporary duration, and the permanence, so the long-term existence of gloves? The perfume and the gloves.
The perfume, so the smell, so it's a very good point, because the smell itself is not permanent. It's more like an ephemeral experience. So that's why I think, you know, like to experience a pair of gloves is very important, because, you know, it's more important to just like ground us in the present, and of course, you know, like every second. It's not just the smell, but also like when we see it, how the light change, how the light, you know, or how the feel, you know, like it changes all the time. So I don't think there is such a thing as permanent gloves. It changes every minute, every second during our interaction.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. That was your talk about, right?
Yeah.
Good. All right. Oh, Joost. Last question is for Joost.
I have a question for Alice in the folder. I wonder, I mean, you're trying to say that the drawing is a kind of artistic feat, or Leegwater moving in that direction. it's so unlike other landscape drawing. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I also think the pressing of contrafeitsel has to do maybe with the measuring, the map making, and I wonder how far you want to move in the direction of saying it is a design for something that might happen. It's so unlike the Beemster in the 1630s, right, when it's still muddy and too moist to build anything on. It's nothing short of a swamp still.
Yeah. Well, the Beemster was drained by 1612.
Yeah.
That was, I think, kind of the extent of Leibachter's contribution at that point. But I think, and this is something that comes through more in his Haarlemmer Meer proposals and his manuscript maps, where he really treats them like a composition. The way that he actually lifts motifs from this drawing that I discussed here and like kind of positions them into the Haarlemmer Meer context, kind of shifts them around, tries different things. Like he's really thinking about it as an image, essentially, in a really interesting way. So I think that comes out most clearly, like with respect to the few remaining things that we have to look at from him, basically. But I mean, I think, but that's also, I think, in support of your point as well, to an extent, in that those are, in a sense, also cartographic images. So I mean, that's something I need to develop more, absolutely. So I appreciate the comment. I don't know if I have a perfect answer for you at this moment regarding.
That's not why I asked the question. I mean, this question, but I have a couple of other things that we can talk about.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
All right. Thank you very much to speakers. Thank you very much for all being here. And let's see each other next year. Bye bye.